so many evidences apart from the question of what the Greeks said who actually saw these Egyptians, apart from all the evidence that Sheikh Antioch has brought forward and others. There is evidence, the migration, the movement of agriculture. Every major plant in Egypt, at least half a dozen are found coming from the south. There's not a single plant that comes down to the south. This nonsense about civilization, that civilization in Egypt was created by Asiatics and Caucasoids, and then they brought the light of civilization down to the benighted black barbarians in the south. Not a single shred of evidence. The script comes up, the agriculture comes up, all the symbols comes up, the conceptions of God, and all the various forms that were to become deities in Egypt. It all comes from the south. The art, everything, you can see its origin in the south, in that Ethiopian and Sudanic world. And Ta-Seti is the culmination, it's the capping of the evidence. When we look at astronomy, as I was pointing to the calendars and the thing found at Namaratunga, they found something even more startling among the West Africans. In the 13th century AD, about 7 centuries ago, they found Africans were plotting an invisible star, Sirius B. Sirius A is a bright star we all see in the night sky. Sirius B is impossible to see with the naked eye. It is impossible to see it with the naked eye. It has a magnitude of about 8.5. And the Africans not only saw it, they plotted its orbit and trajectory right up to the end of the 20th century, up to the year 1990. And the diagram produced by our best astronomy today is identical with what they produced centuries ago. We only became aware of that star towards the end of the 19th century. And not only that, they intuited its mass. This is a white dwarf. It is an imploded star. It's not only impossible to see with the naked eye, it is the most sophisticated astronomy that has shown us that a star so imploded is much heavier than stars that appear 6 times brighter and larger. They came to that conclusion. They had plotted the spiral structure of the Milky Way. They had seen the Jupiter and Saturn, the rings and the moons thereof. They had worked all of that out. But particularly Sirius B. It caused such astonishment, such consternation in astronomical circles that Kenneth Brecht of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he said, the Africans have no business knowing any of this. And that is true. The Africans, as we know them, as we have been learned to conceive of them, have no bloody business knowing anything. So that he has to check himself as to who he's talking about, because when we talk about the so-called traditional African, we are not talking about what lay at the core and heart of those shattered civilizations. If you want a modern example of what I mean, why all these discoveries are coming, but let me for a moment dwell on some new discoveries. Do you know that the Africans actually showed something contracting and expanding within the region of Sirius B, a supernova? Do you know only 2 years ago the Einstein orbiting satellite, one of the United States satellites, discovered the supernova? 2 years ago. Space machine. Last year, one of our space machines, American space machines, sent down radar beams into Africa, 16 feet below the African Earth, and saw traces of ancient rivers running from the Sahara towards the Nile Valley. I said that in my book 7 years ago. Anything special about that, because a few anthropologists had said that too on the basis of migration evidence and other kinds of evidence, linguistic networks, etc. But now they can see it from outer space, above the prejudice. They found, for example, mathematical systems in Africa. The first use of numbers, the first scientific evidence of the use of numbers is found in the Congo Zaire. It's known as the Ishango bone. It's 8,000 years old. It's very simple, but it is cited because it's the first evidence we do have. But we have found far more complex mathematical systems, like the Yoruba, for example, are found to be using a complex mathematical system which one of the mathematicians, Conan, calls one of the most abstract and complex mathematical systems. Why didn't we know about this? Because if you go among the Bushmen of the Kalahari, or the Wugabuga and the Lugabuga, you're not going to find mathematics. I mean, you don't go on the edge of the world to search for technologies. I've lived in Europe. I've not only lived in Western Europe. I spent nearly a year in Eastern Europe. I've lived among primitives, both sophisticated Europeans of the cities and semi-primitive Europeans. I've been in parts of Europe, in a village, where as many as 20 people were using one bathroom. This is the 20th century. Nobody writes about those primitives because it's not fair. That's not the European. That is a European. And this is constantly being done to us. This is taken for granted. If you want to deal with the African, you find a savage. That is good enough. And when we can do that in Europe, and when we try to dwell on civilization, because that's what we are largely involved at least I am, Sheikh Diop, to some extent, Carlos Moore and others are involved in this. The classical civilization, the major classical contributions. When we dwell on this, people say, but you're being romantic. When they're dealing with the primitive, they're not romantic. But when we try to bring it down to the core and center, we're romantic. Look at mathematics in Europe. It was nothing. Do you know that when the number system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's Hindu, the Arabs and Africans invaded Europe as Moors, and the Arabs brought from India the numbers Fibonacci, yes, brought it to Europe first in 1202, but the Europeans didn't accept it because the church said numbers are works of the devil. It's as late as the 17th century. So you have basic arithmetic, that's the most. It became a capital offense during the Inquisition to study advanced mathematics and Arabic documents. Do you know how many documents have been destroyed in the world? The Library of Alexandria, where the Africans had built a library, some people calculated it 1 million, let me be conservative, 500,000. And these are not the libraries you can duplicate. You could blow up any library here. You could duplicate it somewhere else in the world. There are very few manuscripts that are standing by themselves. This was a time when a manuscript represented centuries of learning, where there were few duplicates or no duplicates at all. All destroyed. And yet the fragments exist. So significant that we have 10 major medical texts in African languages. The first medical texts in the world are in African language. The first mathematical papyri which you saw this morning, that's African. Those are the first. Even today, with all the destruction, we could still go back to the African documents and show them on a screen. The Ebers papyrus, the Edwin Smith papyrus, the Smith papyrus, which is 1500 BC. They have chapters on helminthiasis, ophthalmology, gynecology, pregnancy diagnosis, circulation of the blood, the pulse, diagnostic percussion, all that, chapters, intestinal disease and all that 1500 years before Christ.